Musical Traumas is a short animated documentary by Milos Tomic. I believe I'm pronouncing that correctly. Over the next 5 minutes, this presentation will discuss its modes, content, style, and how all of these came together to create an extremely impactful documentary for anybody in or out of the music community. The documentary is made in primarily poetic mode, which is clear when looking at its abstract visuals that are used to build the mood of the scene, its highly controlled and expressive sound design, its use of stories from multiple individuals without them being identified, and their transformation of something familiar, which I'll go into more detail when discussing the content. It does contain elements of other modes, however, the use of a semi-continuous line of events grouped into sections resembling that of observational mode, and the clear narratives that are being presented also being a common trope of the expository mode. The qualities for each of these modes were gathered from a table by Bill Nichols. The content itself can be split into 3 sections. The subject, which is how the introduction of practice in music can be more dramatic than artistic, the narrative, which depicts the stories of multiple students through the beginning and end of their time learning their instruments, and the message, which all ties back to how a lack of passion towards the instrument takes away from the whole experience. One of the best examples of this is at the end of the film, where it states that technically I know how to use it, but I can't really play. Tomic's style is the most noticeable thing in the documentary at a first glance. He uses abstract but symbolic stop-motion animation, and the backgrounds and midgrounds resemble sheets of music, with colorful and shifting shapes throughout. The sound design is also extremely purposeful, often using the instruments from the narrative alongside the ambience to create an eerie and uneasy sounding documentary. A good example of this symbolism this style brings is with the use of shapes of animals, often used to communicate emotion. At 6 minutes and 8, a hand is shown pushing a student to keep playing the piano. The student shapes into a wolf and begins growling at the teacher, who then growls back louder in the form of the dragon. The student then shapes into a nervous mouse and returns to playing the piano. The scene has no dialogue or no specific story. It just captures the emotions that most felt during these times. It symbolizes the lack of say the students had and the consequences of talking back. The visual style also acts as reinforcement of the narrative. At 1 minute 10, a beautiful outdoor environment is shown, full of cool colors and playing children, and as soon as the story mentions violin practice, a gray wave moves across the scene and removes all its color. That visual stylistic decision is enough to express how much dread the storyteller felt about the violin practice without it being communicated outright. When it comes to sound design, an example of the ambience working together with the instruments in the narrative is at 6 minutes 16. A teacher pushes a student to keep playing the trumpet, which is played alongside this subtle humming and seemingly backwards bell. The trumpet's note is also extended dramatically, which all comes together to create an extremely unsettling representation of the teacher just through audio alone. The sound design also helps reinforce narrative elements like its visual design. The previously mentioned scene at 1 minute 10 includes children cheering and birds chirping, which is shifted into screams when the color is removed. While its mode, content, and style are simultaneously present throughout the documentary, that connection is how the impact is created. The next scene is just one example of the 3 working together. The scene is at 7 minutes 47. It has no spoken dialogue and depicts a student playing live in front of an audience. It uses abstract shapes and colors, going from empty to numerous and colorful to then dark and overwhelming, perfectly using the tropes of its poetic mode. The style of the sound design communicates as much as spoken words would have. The audience is shown through the sounds of quiet mumbles and coughs, the bass sounds when the student bows, and the soft glass breaking sound when focusing on the violin case depict how nervous and stressed the student is to play live. Speaking of its actual content, the scene acts as a climax, showing just before the goodbye school section of the narrative, and it's a perfect example of the documentary's subject and a fitting way to display its message. The relationship between the mode, style, and content creates an experience not often considered when discussing music, that being how most people get there. It creates a narrative told verbally, visually, and symbolically, and it's never locked to one.